Well, welcome all. We are at 1 p.m. here in Chicago, so we are going to get started with our conversation with Michelle Seitz. The conversation is being hosted by the Leadership and Society Initiative, which, if you are not yet familiar, and I see mainly friendly faces in this room, is an effort at the University of Chicago to support distinguished leaders in endeavoring meaningful next chapters of impact for themselves and for society. And as you will hear in a moment, Michelle is a role model for such an initiative, as well in our case, as a wonderful advisor to the initiative itself. Speaking of, I am going to take my screen down here so that we can see our guest. Hello, Michelle. How are you?
Seth, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited about this conversation with you. So let me just give a little bit of biographical background, and then I'll actually ask a first question to you where we jump into some of these details. And let me just preview for the group that I'll start by asking Michelle a number of questions, but then around the 1:20 mark, we will come to your questions. So you can begin chatting them in throughout the conversation, and then I'll make sure to get to them when we come to audience Q&A. Michelle Seitz is a purpose-driven executive with over 3 decades of business building success as both a CEO and investor. She founded MeydenVest Partners, which we'll hear more about in 2022, with the goal of ensuring that deserving businesses solving important societal issues have access to both seasoned strategic advice and patient capital. At the age of 35, which is absolutely remarkable as I read that, Michelle, you were tapped as CEO of William Blair Investment Management. It reminds me of one of these Olympians who, wins gold and you say, oh, they're so young. That's incredible. Only in your case, in a field where very few women and very few young people get that type of leadership opportunity. She drove fivefold growth, fivefold, and global recognition for the business over her 17-year tenure. She then served for 5 years as chairman and CEO of Russell Investments, one of the largest investment advisors in the world, operating in 32 countries. And it is an understatement to say we are honored and grateful to have you with us, Michelle, and to have you so involved in LSI more broadly. As I shared, you are a role model. And so, I've shared some of the big hits of, your career, but I'm wondering if you can, in 3 or 4 minutes, give us a snapshot of your story and tell us a little bit about those transition points, how you made your way into investing, how you came to your career at William Blair, your transition to Russell, and then finally what you're up to now. And, that will set us up for the rest of the conversation.
Perfect, perfect. Well, it's hard to give airtime to 35 years, but I'll give it a go. And I actually see some wonderful, friendly faces from my career. So thank you for dialing in. I really appreciate it. And they're an incredible part of my story. But how I came upon investing was a little bit my father. We had a family business in insurance, and he was an active investor. But where it really was sparked was a trip to the Chicago Board of Trade from my little high school in Indiana. We took the bus up to Chicago to see the Museum of Science and Industry, but we stopped on a lark at the Chicago Board of Trade, and I was hooked. So out of school, I ended up at Nations Bank, which is now Bank of America, and baptism by fire, it was 1987. And it got real really quick, and I understood the purpose of the industry. And it wasn't to have the energy of a trading floor, it was to provide for people's financial security. So that became real to me very, very quickly, which I was very grateful for, quite frankly. And then the rest of it, the major transitions, and I've got a few people on the line, it looks like, from my startup phase. I was with a small wealth management firm that we were growing, bootstrapped, and I learned a lot going from a big corporate environment where capital was no problem to a startup phase. And then I went to William Blair, which was greenfield to me. I was so honored to be in a private partnership with my colleagues. And I was an investor at the time, and still obviously am, but I was a full-time investor. But I was so excited by the possibilities of what we could build that I ended up in the middle of a recession in '01, stepping into that CEO role. I'll tell a story about the gray wig that I bought so I could look older. It was a joke, but anyway, I had a great run there. I had phenomenal partners. Private partnership business model is a pretty awesome one. And then the opportunity with Russell arose, working with private equity. It was truly a transformational journey. And so was Blair, but in a different way. Blair was a rocket ship and pure growth and lots of fun. And Russell was a bit more of a catalyst with the private equity ownership and transformation, a big global company with some of the largest asset owners in the world. Moved my family across the country after 26 years in Chicago, but it's been an absolutely phenomenal adventure along the way. And really, I view my time now with MeydenVest. I live on a body of water called Maidenbower Bay, and I love investing in women. So it was a play on words, and that's how it's written. But just very excited for this leg of my journey. But it feels more like a culmination of everything that I've been working toward and doing. And we can talk about it a little bit later, but I'm still figuring it out. I'm not saying that anything is done, but I'm using my time, right, resources, and my voice to make a difference, work with great people, world-class people doing meaningful work that I find interesting and I can be of service to. And then just raising the bar, whether it's with capital or it's with tapping them into networks. So I'm doing a lot of different things, which I'm happy to espouse upon, but that's quickly the background.
Well, it's an amazing background. And you ended by describing a venture, but also a sense of fluidity that, you're in this journey. And what was so striking when we talked in advance, Michelle, is that you do not see this as an encore chapter. That's not even in your vocabulary, the idea of retirement. It's very clear, every chapter matters. And also that you're constantly in, reinvention and thinking about, how do you make that that chapter and then the next one matter. And I was so struck when we were talking that you see many more chapters in your life, and very real. You could live till you're 90 or 100. I mean, realistically, based on a number of factors in society today. And so I just wanted to, before we jump further into your experience, to have you lay out a bit of your philosophy, because I found it so energizing and refreshing, the way that you're thinking about life and career, and how you're not thinking about what is the old model, which was, you learn, you earn, and then you retire. That is out. And it's very clear that you see these as just many chapters of life. And you even mentioned, you could see taking on another big role and moving back in. And so you have all of that openness and thoughtfulness. And I just would love to lay out kind of how you think about this before we jump into MeydenVest further.
Yeah, no, thank you, Seth, for teeing it up that way. I mean, I'm looking at all the wonderful people on the line and friendly faces and new faces. I mean, we all have so much to give. And with the beauty of science and longevity, I've talked a lot throughout my professional career about rising health spans, also requiring wealth spans. So there's a real monetary side of this, which I'm not going to touch on because I've talked about that a lot. But I think the part that we've forgotten is the heart and soul of a society and a community, and engaging the population to solve meaningful problems with the vast amount of knowledge and skills and capacity for growth that they have left. And this construct that we have in place, which many people know, but even the retirement system that we put into place, which galvanized 65 as an official retirement age for Social Security and other kinds of benefits, was created in the late 1800s and the early 1900s when we all died at the age of 65. And so it was never, ever meant to put into place to truncate half of your productive life. And that's how I feel about it. You know, back when I wore the gray wig, when I was 35 years old and I got the feedback I was great in a meeting, but I needed gray hair. I walked down the street in Chicago, I bought a gray wig, and I came back. And I think embracing the fact that I've had this wonderful career that has spanned 35 years, and I believe I have 30 more to go, I think is an absolute luxury of science and our society. And tapping into that, I mean, I actually view my kids to likely have dozens of
Yeah.
careers and intervals, I'll call them, where they reinvent themselves, reskilling, reinvention, going back, learning at great institutions like U Chicago and others. So I just view the whole concept of retirement as a very outdated notion
Yeah.
because it strikes up time of leisure. And frankly, there's nobody I know that doesn't enjoy their life, but they enjoy making a meaningful contribution. So I think the confines of what we've constructed both in our own minds and with the systems themselves should be completely redesigned.
Well, I want to affirm what you're saying. In the process of
Yeah.
building LSI, one of my favorite quotes that we came upon was that longevity does not mean extending old age. It means changing every chapter of our lives. Because when you
Yeah.
realize you could go till 90 or 100, it actually changes everything, including even your young adulthood. And because
Yeah.
now suddenly I'm not probably going to stay in a career that is straight for 60 or 70 years, right? So
No.
the transition, even when I'm in my 20s or 30s, might give me adaptability and transitional capabilities that might look different than in the old world paradigm. And so I just thought that was very
Yeah.
liberating, that idea that, we shouldn't think of longevity as just extending the last part of your life. It actually is changing the entirety of the way that we look at life, which I found very thrilling in a certain sense.
Yeah, and I think just talking about the increasing health spans too. I mean,
Yeah,
I think most people think about physical health, but it
yeah.
is physical health, but it's also mental health, community health, and there's so much more that all of us can continue giving back in different ways. And I think redefining ourselves and the impact we can have at various parts of that journey is just incredibly important, which is I'm trying to live my words. So it's an evolution.
Well, so let's jump into living those words, because you did make this pivot from Russell Investments to MeydenVest. And you have also made, in some ways, a pivot from, a big investment firm to this kind of entrepreneurial phase of life. And so I want to hear what drove that decision, and then how you prepared for and executed it in terms of how you have been able to make this transition at this stage.
Yeah, and some people on the line have helped me thoroughly along the way, and I guess I would say none of us are alone in that journey. There are so many forums and networks that I'm a part of with fellow CEOs or sports figures whose natural time has ended, and there has to be a pivot in their lives and their professional careers. And what I've learned from that along the way is every journey is unique. I will say that I wasn't courageous enough to do it when I thought of it. So it's been 10 years in the making that I've thought through this. So it was while I was at Blair before I took the role at Russell. And I have no regrets about the journey I've been on or what I've done, but I did find it very difficult to find free space, just the ability to have clarity, to zoom out, time to think, versus just getting on the escalator of what you normally know and will normally get opportunities for and do. So even though I tried to prototype it while I was sitting in a full-time operating role for very large organizations, I personally found it very difficult to do.
Yeah.
I ultimately decided that I needed to take the leap and not be in a job while I was trying to figure out what it is I wanted to do. So setting up MaidenVest was frankly my construct to do what was very comfortable to me. I've been investing forever, investing my own capital, speaking, advocating around policy issues. So this was a very natural extension for me of what I've always done. But the beauty, I think, of what I found, and I'm sure everyone on the line, frankly, because I see who you are, would find the same thing. And I feared the phone would stop ringing, people would forget who I was. I have gotten more opportunities over the course of the last 18 months than I have gotten over the course of my last 35 years. I
Wow.
mean, just being open
Yeah.
to listening, the networks that you've built, the things you think of, the things that you'll do. And I've consciously said no to anything that would be a long-term commitment because I wanted a year to just focus on what I wanted to do. But I
Yeah.
found it very freeing, both to have the time to think, to have a bit of an unstructured environment, to be very intentional about how I spend my time, and to learn myself a little bit more. It's hard to deprogram yourself after so long of running on adrenaline. And so I found all of that very free, and I actually sleep now for 7 uninterrupted hours of time. Who would have thought that I
Yeah.
actually needed that much time to sleep? So anyway, I feel like I have a new lease on life. And I've always talked about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, but this has probably been the most uncomfortable that I had been, was taking that step without going to another big CEO job, which I contemplated and almost did as I was winding up my 5 years at Russell. And I just knew in my heart of hearts that would be a mistake.
Well, so I'm curious to ask Michelle about how this new chapter has kind of shaped the way that you approach life now that you're kind of outside of a corporate structure. And I'll just give a little preview as I
Mm-hmm.
ask that question. David Brooks is teaching in the spring with the LSI Fellows. And what he describes is the challenge sometimes and liberation of transitioning at this stage from a place where there may be a very tight external accountability structure to a place where you're guided significantly by your intrinsic motivations. And to be clear, David knows that people go into their work with great intrinsic motivation. I know that was your passion from
Mm-hmm.
when you were seeing the trading floor as a youngster and
Yeah.
believing in investing. But then you come into something like Russell, and even though you're intrinsically motivated, there are earnings calls and there's all this structure, and
Yeah.
you know essentially if you're going to be CEO of Russell who you have to be, right? And then you come into a world where there's freedom, and now you need to be intrinsically, and that can be hard because you may not have touched that muscle as deeply over the last 3 decades while you were building. And so curious kind of how that is shaping this stage of life.
Yeah, no, that is an absolutely phenomenal question. And I would say I'm figuring it out. My father used to tell me self-awareness is a lifelong journey, and it absolutely is. So I'll say this. I say yes to things like this.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
say yes. I say yes to dinners. Dinners I don't want to go to. Speaking is not something I actually enjoy. I do it well. I do it a lot. But I know that it energizes me. I
Yeah,
know that having a deadline and knowing what I want to inspire the people, I want the outcome of this to be that somebody took away something they could use, right? And so that makes me turn it on to think about it. I thought of 5 new things I might do. And just this morning, as I was thinking about what would the key talking points be that I would say. So I do know that I have to insert a certain amount of structure, even though I don't feel like I want to,
yeah,
because I know it energizes me. And so I say yes to things that don't have a long tail, 2 years commitment, a corporate board, things like that. I'll say yes to one more. But I've purposely said yes to clients, to projects, to investments that I didn't completely want to do, but I knew it would be good for me, and I knew it would energize me, and I would learn new things, and that turns me on. And so I think just you've got to prototype that. Everybody's a little bit different, but there needs to be enough structure to your days that you do kick into a high energy place. And I think that's the beauty and the luxury of being able to construct and be intentional about your time, because you'll hold yourself accountable. You'll ask others to
Yeah.
hold you accountable with regular check-ins. And I do have a personal board of directors that I do that with. My family would be number one in that equation, but that's how I do it, at least.
Well, so we are talking about your work in the context of the Leadership in Society initiative. We are very big believers that, you're building this next chapter for yourself. You're also building it for society. And I've been very impressed to learn more about MeydenVest and to see how you're thinking about positively impacting the world. But I'm curious, even though you've introduced it in bits and pieces, if you can just talk about the positive impact that you're aiming to have at this stage.
Yeah, well, I think the way I think about it is, what do I have to give? And it's not just about writing a check. It's also about, can I tap into my relationships, my global network, my skills and capabilities from a strategy standpoint, or a technical expertise. And so I do want to make sure that I'm learning and growing, but I'm also contributing so that the companies that I'm involved with can have leverageable impact in whatever they're doing. And to me, it has to be something that interests me, but also hopefully something that's quite meaningful, solving what I deem to be a pretty big problem. And I don't go into it thinking that, I'm so self-important that my efforts alone are going to change the world, but I know lots of other people can, and I
Yeah.
can be a part of that equation to change the trajectory of how quickly they can have an impact, how much capital they can get, how they can tap into deeper networks. I can be a speaker, I can be an advocate, I can raise the amplification of the issue or the message to a lot of very important contacts that I've made over time that I think would be beneficial. So I do it in lots of different ways. The companies that I've invested in are phenomenal. I'm so motivated by what they're doing and how they're doing it, but it tends to span technology, AI, global healthcare, given the role that I have on a corporate board, Sana Biotech, doing engineered cells as medicine, phenomenal people. I live in the heart of the tech world in Seattle, and am very energized by the things that people are doing in that space and trying to do it responsibly. And then, of course, in asset and wealth management, I have a lot of involvement. So again, it's a combination of advising, consulting. I do try to do mentoring as much as I can, but I need to figure out a way to make that more leverageable. But I would say investing and advising is at the core of what I do. Fiduciary work will be a part of it, serving on corporate boards, but in a nutshell, that's what it is.
Well, so, you're an advisor. You have been very clear that you believe in lifelong learning and the power of transformative change. And we have a whole group of people here that are thinking about transitions. And in the chat, one person is asking if you have advice for the people here based on everything that you've gone through in your journey as they begin their own self-reflection about how to endeavor the chapters of their life. What advice, kind of takeaways, lessons would you want to share with others based on your experience?
Yeah, I would say my biggest learning as part of this, and you get sprinkles of it throughout your life, but when you're so full on busy in an operating role or in one function that can consume your life, along with trying to make room for family and spirituality or whatever else might be important to make a rich life for yourself, I think the one thing that gets lost is that you end up labeling yourself, chronologically. You run through your resume, and I know David Brooks has talked a lot about the eulogy versus the resume. I think, though, that you get trapped, just like you get put into a box, you get labeled. Your identity becomes what you do sometimes, or who you are to other people. That I think just giving yourself time to
Mhm.
zoom out And to get that clarity, sometimes it comes with a big tragedy that happens in your life or the passing of somebody that you love. But capture those moments or create those moments so you can redefine who you really are, remember who you are, who you want it to be, and remember you're not at the end of anything. It's the beginning of something that can be quite special and even more impactful than what you've done that's preceded it. So that's where it's been very informative for me. And I frankly just needed more space from the full-on duties of that came with an operating CEO role for a global company. But I used to do it in the mornings. I used to do it from 4 to 6 a.m. I would journal, I would work out, I would jot down notes, I would dream big dreams. And I think just being able to tap into that part of who you are and ask other people. When I've gotten these phone calls for different opportunities, I ask, why me? What is it you see? And the answers are really interesting because some of them I don't identify with at all, meaning I don't want to do that. And that's not really who I am. And others are quite fresh perspectives on what the transferable skill set is that you have and what you can do. I get a lot of, will you run for office? I have had a lot of people ask me if I would do that. I've never thought of that. I'm not going to do that. But it's interesting when I ask, why do you say that? What do you see? And I would ask that of those that know you well and the opportunities you get.
Well, my advice would be wait 30 more years and then consider running for office. That seems to be what you're intended to do in your 80s. So a little humor. There are some real questions here for you from our wonderful audience. There's a woman who asks, do you have any observations about gender differences as we examine outmoded models of retirement and next chapters? I mean, do you notice anything? And I'll just share that Anne Mulcahy, who is a fellow advisor who had been chairman of Xerox, she had a really interesting discussion as part of her work in LSI with other women about this chapter of life. And one of the things, at least she said, so I'll just do this to spark your thinking, is that in some ways she felt that she had a more holistic way of thinking about her life all along. And so she believed that enabled a smoother transition in some ways because she had interests that were beyond just being, in her case, she was a corporate titan, she was CEO of Xerox, but she had interests beyond that she felt like smoothed her experience a little bit. And that wasn't based on gender, but had some correlations. But you're curious, for any thoughts that you have.
Yeah, well, it's hard not to play off of Anne. She's a phenomenal role model for corporate women all over the world, and she's had an amazing career. I would say I identify with the integration, and I've got all kinds of stories along the way, but I have 5 wonderful children. And thankfully, I didn't ever fall into the identity trap of feeling as though that was going to hold me back from my career and what I wanted to do. And so I've needed to integrate my life in a way that allowed for a rich personal life. At the same time, I had a rich executive track and experience with my own professional life. I would say, though, that there's no gender ownership of identity, right? And having your identity wrapped up in a successful career or a level of expertise, I think is pretty gender neutral. But I think that maybe women can remove themselves a little bit more quickly. That could be an accurate observation. But I would say too that it's always so surprising to me that other people are surprised when older women start businesses or do something else. And with all complete respect for all kinds of men that have worked into their 90s, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, who's, down the street. I mean, they just started going when they were in their 50s and 60s. And I identify more with that than I do when we make a big splash about so-and-so started a business at the age of 58. So I think the reason we do that is to make sure that people don't see it as an anomaly anymore. And maybe the point, well, when we get to the point that it's old news that we have women running for president when they're in their 80s, or running countries, or running companies, or giving away their money in pretty impactful ways, is more the norm and not an exception. But I think it is the norm. We just haven't given it the attention it's due. But hopefully the surprise is going to wear off, and the opportunities will be equal opportunities to everyone.
Well, Michelle, we are at time, with regret, because we could continue this conversation and continue to learn from your immense wisdom for a while. Thank you for being an
Thank
incredible
you.
advisor and for being a real role model for making life matter at every chapter, and for thinking about life in a new way that I think will be the future in how we, in this world of longevity, see all the opportunities that are in front of us. And thanks to everyone else who's with us, who played a
Thank
role in
you.
the story.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Seth. I'm very, very excited to continue to be an advisor.
Well, thank you. And thank you all. Have great afternoons, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.